Hello, Namaskar, and welcome to Sikkim Chronicle. Well, Sikkim this year choose to vote for Parivartan. Almost 25 years old government, SDF government, was toppled by SKM, bringing 17 seats in the assembly election. In this edition, we'll be deconstructing the entire election campaign. Joining with me today in the panel are two prominent personalities. We are being joined by Mr. Pema Wangchuk, who in fact is the consulting editor of an English daily Summit Times and also a very seasoned journalist. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
We are also being joined today by author and also the political analyst, Mr. Jiwan.
Thanks.
So let me start with you. Now, since SKM has formed the government, how do you see the entire election campaign which got unfolded this time? Because it was pretty interesting this year.
Well, I think the election campaign was not half as interesting as some of the previous campaigns because it was one so quick and not every constituency even received a public meeting. So in that sense, it was not half as exciting as some of the previous elections that we have seen. Apart from that, as the results also bear out, that Sikkim we now see is split right down the middle in the choices that they have. So that I think kind of reflected in the way the campaign was run as well. There was so much, there was no real clarity really for me as someone who was reporting on the whole campaign movement. There was no clarity for me about which direction the people were going. Like that, in fact, in 2014 is when we sensed a wave, right? SKM had run a very aggressive campaign. It was all over Facebook. The public meetings were drawing big crowds. This time I saw really not much of a difference between the two parties.
So did you ever sense that there was an undercurrent even?
Me personally, no, I didn't. And I don't think there was an undercurrent. I don't think Sikkim needs an undercurrent anymore. I think democracy is quite well entrenched here for people to openly express their political leanings. So a lot of people, I've heard this thrown about quite casually about this wave of change. A wave probably goes up much higher than what we saw this time, right? I mean, the votes are so evenly divided between the two parties, and 17-15 is hardly a difference. Some extra legwork in two constituencies and the results could easily have been different. Maybe a different choice of candidates in one constituency and the result could have been very different. So in that sense, yes, I mean, but I'll admit, I didn't expect SKM to win. Because I did not see them replicating the Josh, so to speak, of 2014 and 2019. I just didn't see that. I just didn't see that. So yeah, it did kind of surprise me.
Right. Jiwan sir, you wrote a beautiful article giving a perspective of this election, what was the hit and what the miss for both the parties. Do you think anti-incumbency was one of the major factors for the SDF to lose?
It probably was, but I think apart from the four reasons that I gave in my article, that SKM was very absorbed party. It kind of, went to the ground zero, and whoever was wanting to join, they were like bringing them into the fold. And then, of course, then there was ballot paperwork, which they probably did better than the SDF. And then candidate choice, because SDF is the grand old party, right? And it had lots of liabilities. It had, layers of leadership, and that opinions to be factored in, and so I think somewhere down the line, choice of candidates perhaps wasn't the best, particularly the second list, I would think so, and the disconnect, the alienation of their beloved leader with the people. I think that was felt at the grassroots, and which the leadership somehow did not pick up. But apart from those four, I think other factors that worked against the SDF was they were not able to tell the story loud enough, because the election campaign, the process has changed. There's a huge difference in how it used to be done, as he said, say in 2014 versus 2019. It's now basically in social media, and SKM was louder in social media. SDF had done a lot of work we must give credit for what they did, right? Their literacy from 56% to 96% in 25 years. I mean, that's a miracle. Poverty reduction, from 41 to now minus, somewhere below 8. That's another miracle. They did a lot of other life expectancy, above the national average, 73%. But somehow messaging, as Pema and I were talking outside today, somewhere, they missed the plot in conveying the right message. Not the right message, but in the right way. They had a huge message to tell the people, but I think they didn't have enough loudness, so to speak, to reach the voice, the message into the grassroots.
So, do you think SDF somehow failed in, framing a proper strategy and mobilizing the resources as what SKM did?
No, yeah, definitely. That was quite obvious. In fact, on the day of the counting, on the day of the count, we were having some discussions in office, some of which was also streamed. And my first instinct was to credit the victory, the SKM victory, to its party workers. I think the SKM party worker was much more motivated and inspired than what we saw of the SDF camp. The SDF camp was lethargic, to be polite, and absent really from reaching out to the voters on the day of the election. If that was the case on the day of the election, of the day of the voting, sorry, imagine what the campaign must have been like, right? They were too dependent on one person to pull the entire ship through. And when you're faced with the kind of excited and energetic party workers that SKM managed to mobilize, I'm not really surprised that they lost some constituencies substantially, and some with a very close margin. Like he was saying, they had a problem of messaging. And that has to fall on the shoulders of whoever is responsible for getting the word out.
Right.
So yeah, they did fail in that, in the actual legwork that is required. I mean, how many times did we hear of actual campaign work, effective campaign work? I mean, anyone can walk around homes offering khadas and saying vote for me, but obviously to win the people's trust requires much more.
True.
That didn't happen.
True.
That didn't happen.
So, Arithang and Sari, in fact, played one of the most pivotal roles, to turn the table around this election. Had Ashish Rai and Langta contested from SDF, people say SDF would have easily won. How do you see these factors, two factors?
Hindsight always gives you the luxury of sitting and looking back and then say, oh, this would have happened this way and this would have happened that way. So when we see the results, that particularly the Ashish Rai factor, I think would have played a huge role, because being an independent candidate and becoming the nearest rival to the winner is a huge thing, right? I mean, if he was a party candidate, he would have definitely pulled it through. That's what I feel personally. But I don't know the Lamtha factor, because the margin is really huge. That area looks to me as the SKM bastion. So I really don't know. But as some people say, if ticket was given to Mr. Lamtha, maybe that would have sent a better message to the Gangtok voters. But how, I have no idea. But let me also quickly add to what Pema just said. He said that SDF almost looked lethargic. I would think perhaps they were too tired of winning. They were winning the election every single time, for 5 consecutive terms. And perhaps, they were deceived by a notional invincibility of the party, particularly of their leader. They thought that Mr. Pawan Chamling was invincible. And he almost looked invincible, right? So they thought that, and as you said, there was not the same energy SKM had put in 2019. And so when they compared the 2014 SKM campaign with 2019, SKM did look weaker. And so perhaps they thought that we are a sure winner, you know, and so perhaps that deceived them. Could be, but you have to do more clear analysis, post hoc analysis on this, and that's for SDF party to do. But having said that, SKM also, they shouldn't really be celebrating too much, because as he very aptly said, 1715 is hardly a mandate for change. So they have got a lot of homework to do as well.
2,600 votes by any independent candidate like Ashish Rai is a pretty good number.
It is huge.
Right. So how do you see this factor of Arithang?
Arithang is one constituency. I'm sure there's some other constituencies that SDF lost where also the popular candidate was ignored.
True.
And Arithang kind of sticks up, right? It's not just that he came third. He also received the most number of postal ballots out of all three.
Right.
Right. So he was so obviously, given the numbers and how they fell, he was so obviously the choice who should have been picked. Every party wants to win. But I think that's where the structural limitations or compromises, I would rather call it, that SDF has made will have to kick in. Shouldn't word from the ground travel undiluted right up to the top when they're selecting the candidates?
Right.
If Ashish Rai won the first round of EVMs,
Yes.
right, and then of course SKM took over. But we would also keep in mind that Arithang had gone to SKM last time as well, so that's not really a loss for SDF. I think the bigger worry for SDF was when it lost its own sitting constituencies to SKM. But in Arithang, of course, he was a factor. And the lesson that SDF should take away from this whole episode is they have to establish clear lines of communication, where what the party worker on the ground feels about candidates should travel up to the whoever takes these decisions. That obviously didn't happen in Ashish's case. If you look at the way the votes fell, you join SDF and SKM votes, SDF and Ashish Rai votes, he wins by a huge margin. And so obviously, yeah, that was a bad call. As far as Shari is concerned, again the same problem, right? Shari was also a seat that was with SKM. So SDF would have had to work hard, very hard anyways, to win that. So if they lose it, they're not really losing anything much. Their bigger losses are when they lose Biaksum Tashiding, Yanthan, the seats in West Sikkim and the few in South Sikkim. Those are bigger losses. Or people point out at Renok as another example where a better candidate would have made a difference. Yeah, maybe SDF will not learn the lesson because they had the same lesson taught to them last time as well, right? Where again the whole debate was about you didn't give us the right candidate and hence the SKM guy won. This time, no better. So I think at the end of the day, yeah, the party has to work on its structural hierarchies. What kind of message reaches up. I mean, coteries will tell you what you like to listen, right? But having echo chambers does not help political strategizing.
Let's talk about the 5 candidates who switched from SKM to SDF and also contested election this time, and all of them got defeated. So what message exactly the voters would like to give, what is the message the Sikkimese voter is giving by not making them win the election? What do you think?
That crossing the floor is not what we want from our leaders. I think that's the message they're giving. But I think that would not be the entirely correct analysis. There have been in the past leaders who crossed the floors and then won the elections later on. So I don't think that's what that people are conveying. I think this year giving tickets to those who crossed the floor was a huge blunder because SKM was still live and kicking. Right? And so earlier on when people came from Sikkim Sangram Parishad to SDF and then they were given tickets and they contested election from SDF tickets, but by the time they were given ticket from the SDF party, Sikkim Sangram Parishad was hardly a force to reckon with, right? It was almost a dying party. But this time SKM was, live and kicking, and to give their candidates ticket, I think didn't click for the SDF, and I think that's for the SDF to learn.
What do you think? Hashtag Imandar versus Gaddar did play out for SKM?
Like they said, they managed to sell the narrative very well. Their messaging was better. But no, I think, yes, that is one of the messages. And hopefully that is the message people take away. Because switching sides has been playing out for too long in Sikkim. Right? But I don't think that is the message that people gave out. Except for Pinzo Chopel, I think. None of the other losses really surprised me. Because in the campaign stage itself, it was clear that at least 3 were walkovers for SKM. Right? The way some of the candidates campaigned, it was quite obvious. Arithang was obvious. Kabi Wangchuk was obvious. Pinzo Chopel not so much. Renok was obvious, and West Pennam was also kind of a tight fight, and that's how it ended up. West Pennam was close. Gangtok, of course, has traditionally voted in surprising ways, so that factor is there as well. But I hope that's the message that people take away.
So lately, I've been interacting with people to understand their perception. Many are saying that one of the factors which led SKM win is Goulet not contesting from any constituencies, which perhaps gives much of a time and space for the other candidates. Well, how do you take this?
I don't think so.
Why?
I don't think that's a factor, because I think, if anything, he would have campaigned as much anyways. Right? It's not as if Goulet campaigned any more than what Mr. Chamling did. Mr. Chamling was contesting from 2 constituencies, and I'm sure he put in as many hours as Goulet did. Goulet probably started earlier. So I think Goulet not contesting was never a plus point for me. I in fact saw that as I just think that SDF failed to kind of capitalize on that and tell the people the reasons why Goulet was not contesting. It was not out of the goodness of, it is obvious, right? It's not out of the goodness of his heart or his support for the party that he said, I will not contest so that I can campaign for the party. That was obviously not the case. It was the fact that he's disqualified from campaigning, which I think SDF just could not convey effectively to the people. So, of course, it helped the party cadre, right, to have him around, have him free to campaign all over for them. But I don't think that was the factor that won them the elections, no.
Right.
I think it was SDF's failings that contributed more to the SKM victory than this factor, at least.
Goulet coming out of imprisonment did somehow give a message to the people that now the leader has really come back.
Second coming of leaders always make a difference, right? And I think that did have an impact. Suddenly him coming out from jail, that Sanjay Dutt coming out of jail, those kinds of things. It may not have a long-term impact, but it does have an instant impact. And some sympathy will flow towards him, and which it did this time. So I think that did work. But also I think where Goulet's second coming also worked was when he was away. This was actually, he was telling me, while he was away, his second string leadership worked so hard, and that worked for the party. If Goulet was not in prison, would he have worked as hard as his second string leadership? That's a question for SKM to really ponder. Because earlier when he lost the election, there was a complaint that he didn't work to hold his team together. He was kind of laid back and so on. So perhaps him being in jail was a blessing in disguise for the party.
Alright, so one of the aspects what we are going to talk now is the effective mode of communication by both the parties. We attended press conferences of both the parties, and I personally feel that SKM somehow was an upper hand to disseminate and communicate and to use the press and media as well as the social media. What is your perspective on this?
Well, that's without doubt. Without doubt. I think SKM ran a much tighter ship. They ran a more coherent press and media campaign. Even outreach among the people. SKM was much more effective. SDF was boring, to be polite, and they were so traditional. When I say traditional, I don't mean it in a negative way, but it's in the style of speaking, right? Where you dance around an issue for the whole afternoon but not get to the point. We see that in SDF press releases. We saw that in SDF press conferences as well. So, yeah, that life was not there. I mean, you're running an election campaign. It's not a bureaucratic press briefing that you're doing. So, definitely, SKM was much more effective in communicating to the media, to the people everywhere. Like, you were one of the people on the field who was easier to access, right? SKM or SDF leaders. Who was willing to come on record with anything that you had to ask, SDF or SKM, right? We tried that as well. We tried to get people on record. We sent out requests for contacts and things like that on people we could call at 11 o'clock in the night if we wanted to get a clarification. Who gets back to us, right? So it is all that. It's like, the SDF office was probably wrapped in more red tape than Tashiling Secretariat, I think.
True, that's true.
So that's what happened, yeah.
So the spokesperson like Jacob Kalingo perhaps is now given a new nomenclature, Chanakya of SKM. He was like more vibrant and he was more like, clear communicating the message.
Yes, it was like, to continue the point that Jiwan was also making, the 1 year that Mr. Goulet was away from actual party affairs that he spent in jail, forced the next rung of leadership to step up, right? People like Jacob, even Kunganima and Sonam Lama, right? Do you think they would have been as vocal and as active and as spontaneous had the party president been among them? Probably not. Yeah. Probably not. Or what happens is that you still have a president, but he's not among you, right? So the responsibility, you take up the responsibility of the party. I think that is what worked in SKM's favor. At the village level, the party workers said that it's my job now to do all this. Do you see that in SDF cadre? I mean, I've not seen that. I've not seen that for like 20 years now. It's just that it's caught up with them now. So, and when it's up to the people, they'll speak their mind. For instance, how many SDF, let's say, block level workers or even district level workers went up on Facebook and issued statements without getting it cleared by anyone. Went up with their smartphones on the spot and just recorded. I understand it's easier for opposition leaders, right? Because you're constantly on the aggressive mode. Not so much for the ruling, if you belong to the ruling party. But still, that initiative, the party cadre taking initiative, the party leaders taking initiative, the spokesperson taking initiative. No initiative in SDF I saw.
So the transpiring of message was a sheer failure.
Yeah, you know what Barack Obama did was leveraging the nice and small thing through social media, right? People have become impatient. They are not going to listen to your roundabout messaging, right? They just want quick one-liner, like you said, Imandar versus Gadar. I would not personally like this kinds of wordings, the choice of words, but this kind of one-liner, catchy one-liner, this kind of catches the imagination of the people. Of course, this will have a very short shelf life. Now when you sit back and think about it, this is hollow, this is really nothing, but it works electorally, and it kind of changes people's minds, and it kind of fascinates people within a certain period of time, and that's the main target, right? Gone is the time of giving long lectures about what you want to do and so on and so forth. I think that's what Modi is doing. One-liner, Ab ki baar Modi Sarkar, and so on and so forth. I think this is one thing. Another thing is, in this social media front, I think this is said over and over again, SKM was a consolidated team. In my first book, I did not miss a single post from them. The sharing was aggressive. Everybody shared. Whereas SDF social media was divided. Everybody had a little group, and so, if this is not from my group, I wouldn't share it. But SKM had that hunger for sharing, and then if it's SKM, I would share it. And that's why they got this noise circulated wide across the state. Also, they were targeting the new generation, and this new generation people just want, this nice and quick things, social media, and they really leveraged that. And I think that worked to their advantage.
So let's come to parliamentary constituency, a very marginal win for SKM, 12,000. What do you think, Indrahang, Divi Kotwal? What went wrong with Divi Kotwal and SDF party?
One was, of course, Indrahang was very different from all the previous MP candidates that you've had. Right? This is not to say that Divi Kotwal was a bad choice, but essentially that Indrahang was so exciting and immediately made a connection with the younger voters, right? And that was obvious even among traditional SDF supporters, because if you look at how they voted, SDF got in total numbers more number of votes than SKM in the assembly elections, right? Logically speaking, all of these votes should have gone to their MP candidate as well, because anyone who pressed the button for SDF in the assembly should have gone and pressed the button for parliament, but that didn't happen. But at the same time, not all the people who didn't vote for SDF, who voted for SDF but not for SDF in the parliament, they didn't go to Indrahang, right? Because the margins reflect that. The number of more votes that SDF has in the assembly is much higher than the margin that Indrahang managed to pull. So they wasted their votes, but what it ended up doing was defeating their candidate. So obviously the choice of candidate was something that worked. But that's it's a one-off deal, right? It's not going to happen every time. But yeah, I mean, and that's one example of where the candidate won the election for them. That's one example of that. Yeah.
So Nathan managed to got 16,000 votes. Yeah. Like one of the factors, like, in the parliament. How do you see, I mean, like, him, like, Indrahang won and Latin managed to get 16,000. Did this make a difference for Divi Kotwal?
I think Latin actually got NTSTA votes, right? And which then, if Latin hadn't gotten that much vote, the margin of win for Indrahang would have been even larger.
Yes.
Right? Indrahang to me is a very pleasant looking young man, but I'm not really impressed with his interviews that I've watched. He hasn't really grasped a lot of political issues of Sikkim. Okay, so he's just an average, I mean, politician, and of course he's an intelligent person. Is definitely going to improve from here on. But where Mr. Divi Kotwal failed was the way he delivered his speech. This is my purely personal opinion. He wasn't speaking the language of Sikkim. Sikkimese leaders don't deliver speech like he does. He was talking like Modi to me. He was talking like Nepal's leaders. The way he was delivering his speech. So I think people thought alienated from him. He doesn't speak our Sikkimese language. I mean, you better make some grammatical mistake, but speak in the local tone. That's what I mean by language. Whereas Indrahang was a typical Sikkimese young man, addressing his audience. And so I think that worked against. But also, there was a communal voting for the MPs. There was a lot of cross-voting. For example, Birjan Tamang lost from his constituency, from SDF. But in the same constituency, Divi Kotwal won. How did that happen? So there was obviously some communal factor that worked. And in a larger context, maybe that worked for Indrahang, because there was a wounded conscience among the Limbu communities that they were not given the assembly seats, reservation wasn't granted. And so they were kind of nurturing that wound. And then suddenly SKM comes with the Limbu MP, which hadn't happened in the recent past. So, okay, so, here's somebody from our community as MP. So, we have this famous word historic in Sikkim. So there's a historic decision, a Limbu candidate, why not vote for him? And perhaps that must have worked for him. But I really haven't done the in-depth analysis on that. This is just off-the-cuff remark that I'm making.
Divi Kotwal are resorting to gimmicks. We know gave so much of space for SKM to because we know about the memes which was created later. How do you think it did play out for SKM?
I don't know whether that was I'm sure it was a factor, right? Because if you get the chance to ridicule a candidate, you make his candidature that much less serious in the people's mind. So, did it become a major factor in leading to his loss? I don't think so, because then the margins would have been much more. The margins would have been like people would have just written him off. That didn't happen either, because this election was so close at every level that it is difficult to pinpoint on one factor that swung it for either side. So in that sense, because it is so close, I guess that viral video and things like that might have convinced enough undecided voters not to vote for him. But if you look at how previous elections have played out, that's never discouraged them earlier. If anything, it made them more a part of them than, like he was saying, his speeches were so distant and it alienated the people. This should have struck a deeper connection. But then what it did serve to prove was it kind of played out the contrast even more.
Right.
It played out the contrast between the two candidates even more, and that probably was just that slight edge that the other candidate needed. Very possible.
So Jiwan, so what do you think, what would be the challenges ahead for both the parties now?
Obviously, for SDF to hold the team together, there is a sense of disappointment, discouragement, and so on. So that will be a challenge for the SDF. But then SKM has even bigger challenges. If you give me a little more time, let me explain what their challenges are. They say they are Krantikari, and Krantikari is a tremendously profound term, revolution. And revolution, was Sikkim in really need of a revolution? Because revolution, if you go to the history, has always happened when there was no democracy. And revolution then legitimizes a lot of violent approaches. If you read communist leaders, they would say violence is a positive tactic to bring change. Now, I was thinking of a French Marxist, Georges Sorel. He had said, we are promised science, but what we are given, what we are offered are just the words. We have not been given anything to work. Now, the challenge for the SKM now would be to keep the people engaged in the revolution. Okay, revolution is not about promises; it's about ideas. And what so far the SKM government has done is just giving promises, like Saturday holiday. Good thing, we will give you a job in 100 days, and we will regularize all the temporary jobs in 100 days. These are all promises being fulfilled. These are not ideas. This will not keep people engaged in a process of revolution. Now, if the SKM is really looking for a long-term political engagement, how are they going to keep the people engaged in a revolution is going to be a huge, huge problem. Because this promise keeping is just a painkiller. It doesn't cure the real issue, right? And so it would be very interesting to see how the SKM leadership would bring about that change. Change to me is progressivism. It's a progressiveness. And how are they going to keep the momentum of progressiveness on will be very interesting to watch.
Do you agree with his observations?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the way ahead. SDF, the challenge for SDF would be that it sulks for lesser time. Because after the last elections, even though they formed the government, they sulked, I thought, for too long. And in that, they lost momentum building up to the next elections. So that will be important. I mean, keeping the flock together, yes, that's always a challenge in Sikkim once you're voted into the opposition. But the bigger challenge for SDF will be to re-engineer its party structure. How does it make sure that it has the right people in the right places? Because it's obviously ignored that aspect of its party hierarchy. For SKM, running the government will be a challenge because 15 people in the opposition bench is huge. You don't have absolute majority in the house. And like he was saying, if there are any big ideas that you want to come up with, it needs 3/4 of the assembly to endorse it. How are you going to do that? So that is going to be a challenge. And with Mr. Chamling in the opposition, it's not going to be easy for them. I'm not saying that he's going to be petty, but he is the most seasoned politician that you have around. So it's not going to be easy going for SKM. then they will have to face the challenge of what happens if word comes back that PS Tamang cannot contest the elections. How does the party get over that? Who then becomes the chief minister? I mean, within the party, there's like a lot of complications ahead for them. And so politically and as journalists, and also for the lay people out there, good times ahead, because everyone will be wooing all these segments.
True.
And that kind of, a lot of news will be created. People, they'll make sure that the people stay happy. So interesting times ahead, big challenges.
Yeah, and then let's also talk about some positives, right, for both the parties. The positive for SDF, I think this was a much needed break for the party to sit back, step back, and have a deep introspection of where things went wrong. And also, I think Mr. Pawan Chamling, having led from the front for 35 years, basically 25 years as the chief minister, I think he's a tired man. He needs some break. And so I think this will give him some
new boost.
Yeah, some time to kind of re-energize himself, both mentally, physically, and so on. So, and also other party leaders to think within the party, to think where their ideas misfired, where their chief leaders' ideas misfired. So this will give them some time to think. But for SKM, having struggled for 10 years, now they have the power in their hand. And so this is a good thing for them to now pitch their ideas and see how they can bring about the changes that they have dreamt of. So there are positives for both of them, but challenges are really daunting for both the parties. And let's see. Sikkim also has a history of cameo governments. Sanchaman, Limbu, Bibi Gurung, their government lasted for a very short period of time. So SKM would like to think that this is not just going to be a cameo government, and they have to really cement their position in the establishment. And so let's see how things work from here for them. So I would like to wish best of luck to both the parties. And also, there are other parties like Baichung Bhutia's party. We should grow up and become a force to reckon with in Sikkim. And there are so many other parties. All the non-communal parties in Sikkim, they all should really come up and stake their claim in the political competition.
That's true.
Yeah.
Any ending note you would like to add?
No, I mean, just that, unfortunately, I mean, continuing with what Jiwan was saying, talking about the time that they don't have time. They're very decisive by-elections around the corner,
Yes,
right?
that's true.
So there's not much time that anyone has to kind of sit back and rest or contemplate. It has got to be much quicker than that. But yeah, and this is a major moment. I mean, not to take away anything from anyone. I mean, the people might not have been as decisive in their mandate as many would like to believe. But this is still a major moment in Sikkim. Government changing after 25 years is not an easy task to pull off in a small state like Sikkim, in the kind of constituencies that you have. So the fact that people express themselves is wonderful.
True.
Is wonderful. And what is also a fact is that I don't think we should be looking for silent waves in Sikkim, because everyone, I mean, you get into a share cab and people speak their mind openly. That was not the case 25 years back. Right? People would whisper names and their political leanings. So that's something that needs to be nurtured. I just hope that the winners are more gracious and the losers less despondent after these results, because that is what Sikkim requires, really.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in the discussion, and what a thoughtful insight on the entire election campaign and the challenges ahead for both the parties. Thank you so much to Pema sir and Jiwan sir. So please do put in your point of view in the inbox below, and please log in at www.thesikkimchronicle.com for more stories. With camera person Ashish Gurung, this is Nirmal for Sikkim Chronicle.